Member for Surrey North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be splitting my time with the member from Charlesburg, St. Charles. Mr. Speaker, as always, it's an honor to speak to Bill C-26, which amends a number of acts which deal with the sexual offenses against children. Mr. Speaker, I would like to speak as a parent, as a father, as an uncle, and hopefully someday as a grandfather. I have two children, Mr. Speaker, and any time the subject of child exploitation comes up, I think all parents across this country would have zero tolerance for any sort of child exploitation that occurs in our society. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a good step in the right direction. However, there were a number of amendments that were introduced in the committee, and also there were a number of recommendations from the witnesses, the experts, the stakeholders that provided very good evidence to amend the bill. As usual, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives failed to entertain any of those. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I know all of my colleagues, and we often talk about, as colleagues, as parents, we talk about our children, and there's no doubt in my mind in this House that whether you're on this side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle, every single one of the members of this House would be dead set against child exploitation. And not only that, I've seen this House over the last number of years bring in a number of initiatives that have tightened the laws regarding child sexual exploitation, Mr. Speaker. And we were happy to support those initiatives. As such, you remember Bill C-10, the omnibus crime bill introduced by the Conservatives, and we actually wanted to fast-track those particular sections that dealt with the child exploitation, Mr. Speaker. That's one side of the story, Mr. Speaker, is to bring in legislation in order to ensure that our children are safe in the communities. And we should be doing that as parliamentarian. I'm very proud of the record of the NDP, the official opposition, to support those kinds of initiatives that enhance the safety of our children. Mr. Speaker, it's one thing being tough on the crime. You also have to be, you can't be soft on community safety. And that is the record of the Conservative government. They are soft on community safety, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you are going to, if you really want real protections, laws alone will not provide that. You need to provide additional resources, money, investment into communities in order to ensure the service providers, the other stakeholders, the RCMP, our law enforcement agencies, have the tools and the resources in order to ensure that our children are safe from these predators, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the member earlier talked about the money that was unspent. I'll talk about that in a second here. I want to quote from the committee Steve Sullivan, Mr. Speaker. He's the former federal ombudsman for victims of crime, and he would certainly know something about resources in the community, what is offered here. Here, this is what he said, Mr. Speaker. The federal government recently announced it was cutting the measly $650,000 in funding that Corrections Canada offers. In addition, the Circle of Support and Accountability Program receives funding from the National Crime Prevention Centre, which is also set to end this fall. Mr. Speaker, all in all, the program costs about $2.2 million over a year. Like most community-based victim services, cost Circles of Support and Accountability is fairly a cheap program. It has 700 volunteers across the country who meet with offenders after their release to help them find jobs and places to live or just to catch up over coffee. They support offenders as they settle into normal lives that do not involve new victims. They hold them accountable. So this is a program that, Mr. Speaker, this program has actually shown a success. Here's some of the stats that have come out. Circles of support and accountability numbers are impressive. One study found that 70% reduction in sexual recidivism for those who participate in circles of support and accountability compared to those who did not. Another study found an 83% reduction in child sexual recidivism, Mr. Speaker. So this is their record, Mr. Speaker. If we're really concerned about ensuring safety for our children, safety in our community, they're cutting the very programs that have shown success in the communities that provided 700 volunteers, Mr. Speaker. These are Canadian parents that are willing to volunteer their services in order to ensure that our communities remain safe. Yet this government pulled the rug underneath from this very, very successful program. So, Mr. Speaker, we can create all the laws we have. We can say we were tough on crime, but it doesn't work if we're soft on community safety, and that's the record of this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's, we had a couple of cases in my constituency, or Surrey, British Columbia. We had a young lady that was murdered. By a sex offender who was, known to the RCMP and was on the list of, likely to reoffend. And we had, my heart goes out to the family. My heart goes to the parents, what we did as a society, Mr. Speaker, as a government, we let this happen in our communities. Where was the support? How are we monitoring these people when they're released into the community? If we know these people are likely to offend, why are they being dropped into the community with some sort of support, either whether we provide resources to the RCMP or we provide resources to the very frontline workers that provide these kinds of services, that monitor these individuals? And we have programs in place where recidivism rate for sexual offenses was reduced by 83%, as just said, and yet this government is cutting those very programs. In fact, the mayor of the city of Surrey has called for more resources to ensure that once an offender is released, if they are released, that we have proper resources to ensure monitoring of these individuals, making sure that they have support in place to ensure the safety of our children, Mr. Speaker. And unfortunately, the very, I often talk about this, Mr. Speaker, facts, research, that's not something conservatives believe in, because we know where they get their facts from. We've seen them pick their facts from Kijiji rather than relying on science, rather than relying on what works in the community. What works in the community, Mr. Speaker, very programs, circles of accountability and support. Those are the kind of programs that work in the community. And here's another example, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about the changes. I don't understand as a parent. I don't understand as a legislator. I'm running out of time, Mr. Speaker. I don't understand as a member of Parliament. So here's the government wants to enact High-Risk Child Sex Offender Database Act to establish a publicly accessible database that contains information that a police service or other public authority has previously made accessible to the public with respect to persons who were found guilty of sexual offenses against children and who pose a high risk of committing crimes of sexual nature. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the government is, if the offender poses a high risk of repeating crimes of sexual nature, why are they being released in the community in the first place? So that's how idiotic this government is, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, if we're really concerned about ensuring safety of our children, we do need to provide resources. This bill does not provide any resources for our community to ensure safety in our communities.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member